This is Maker Galaxy.
We're always talking about the future of design, the future of technology, the future of making. In a world where food-based 3D printers will be sitting on our kitchen counters next to our toasters and blenders, a world where we can model complex objects using just our hand gestures, how do we find the next big thing? Maker Galaxy is a show that explores the crossroads of design, technology, and the future of making. Welcome to the show, everybody. I'm your host, Simon Martin, and this week our special guest definitely fits the mold of somebody who beats to her own drum, Alice Taylor of MakieLab. Alice left her career at the popular Channel 4 in the UK to launch her own 3D printed toy company, Makies. With a background in gaming and all things hip, Alice has turned her popular Makies toys into a soon-to-be-launched gaming experience that encourages users to create 3D printable objects within an iOS game. We'll talk with Alice about how her idea came about, how she put her concept into action, some of the challenges of manufacturing on demand, and most importantly, her favorite Brussels sprouts recipe. Today's show is brought to you by CAD Junkie. For those looking to step up their CAD game and stay on top of the latest in software tips and tricks ranging from SolidWorks to Rhino and Modo to Adobe, check out more and get a free membership over at cadjunkie.com. Welcome, Alice. We'll get into Makies in a little bit, but before we do, we want to know, who is the real Alice? What is your background and what's your favorite Brussels sprouts recipe?
Oh my goodness. What's my background? My background is in mainly digital media, mainly games, video games, and Brussels sprouts recipe. Well, the only way to do it is with bacon, so fried with bacon.
Ooh, that sounds good.
And chestnuts if you can get them.
Okay, and so your background is in gaming. Could you elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah, I basically have been kind of peripherally involved in video games in the sense that I've built websites for them, I've commissioned them, which is the same as a publisher. And now with MakieLab, we're building games and apps and a website app that you can 3D print from effectively that produces toys. So the gaming side of it is really important to us because I think that's where it gets really interesting, where you can print things that not only have you made, but that are connected to your achievements in that game system. Leveling up stuff.
Totally. So did you start with kind of the gamification of 3D printing? I mean, or did it start just as like a custom 3D printing service?
Yeah, the idea. So it wasn't so much, I guess it is gamification. The original idea was and came from virtual goods kind of things. So virtual worlds for kids, free-to-play games, that kind of thing. I had the idea in 2010 and I was at a conference called Digital Kids and I was looking at, the latest developments in things like Club Penguin, and just thought, why can't you turn these little digital avatars and all of their little toys that you see in the game world into real toys using 3D printing? So that's how it got started, and it's interesting enough just being able to make physical objects from a digital world, but I think it starts to get really, really interesting when you have completely unique objects that are tied to your account, that are tied to your specific achievements and stuff, and that's the sort of thing that we're looking at the moment.
So you previously worked at Channel 4, correct?
Mm-hmm.
And
yeah.
What were you doing there?
Basically publishing games. I mean, for the most part,
okay.
My job was commissioning editor for education, and the remit was to produce digital media for teens and tweens. That would help them, learn stuff that they may not learn through the curriculum or watching traditional educational TV. So it was web and kind of digital games, web-based stuff, web-based telly, and kind of stuff like that. So my job was basically to go around with the money and find the talent in independents and production companies and all that kind of stuff, and games companies, and commission them to make games about things like sexual health.
Interesting, very interesting. So you ultimately left behind a seemingly well-paying job and took a giant leap into a new sector. So that speaks volumes about your faith in the additive manufacturing industry. So what ultimately lit that fuse that made you take that leap? Was it like a specific product or event, or when did everything converge and how did it converge?
Oh gosh. I'd been watching 3D printing for a while. So my husband writes science fiction, and he had already incorporated 3D printing into one of his books. That's Cory Doctorow, and he wrote a book called Makers.
Okay.
And that was the sort of thing we were doing, was hanging out in fab labs and, twiddling around with things. And so going back to that 2010 thing when I was at Digital Kids, I knew enough about 3D printing to know that it was probably possible, but not enough to know whether it was actually possible. And so once I'd had the idea, I then kind of spent 6 months basically sketching stuff out and, Googling a lot.
Yeah.
And I built a prototype. So I found a friend on the internet, and he modeled a basic doll for me off some sketches, and I sent it off to iMaterialize, and it came back as a bone white weird marionette, but it was the basics of a doll. And at that point I was like, okay, this is good enough. I'm going to quit my job and see if I can turn this into something awesome. Exactly. And so a bunch of, it is odd.
Totally.
Somebody with a completely digital background, no product design, but at the same time I think that I'm an entrepreneur, so I'm the sort of person who's just have a go at a lot of things anyway. But I also think that I guess naivety, or whatever you want to call it, helps, because certainly along the way I've met a lot of people who've said, oh, you can't do that. That's not how you do it. That's not how products are made, or whatever. And you can't use 3D printing to make toys. But because I hadn't ever been trained in that you can't, my natural response was, why not? I'm gonna have a go. So,
of course.
Yeah, and here we are.
Well, that's how disruption happens. So, well said. So, okay, Makies. For those listening in, Makies are 3D printed posable dolls designed by a user online or through the Makies iPad app. And unlike other 3D printed products we've seen come and go over the past few years, Makies have managed to stay above the surface and have even become the world's first CE certified 3D printed toy. So what is a CE certified 3D printed toy, Alice?
That it basically means it's passed European toy safety certification. So the code name for that is EN71, but it just literally means that the dolls are certified for safe play with kids 3 and up. And that's not the age that we're aiming at, but they are safe for 3 and up in Europe. And, the next thing for us to do is to extend that to the US and Asia. And it's just a process you go through. You have to test for materials safety and flammability, and things like sharding, like whether you can smash the toy and turn it into a stabby object and things like that. And so that's why for a while we were saying, look, world's first 3D printed toy, because it's a kind of toy with a capital T. It can be sold on retail shelves, and that basically makes a big difference for fairly obvious reasons.
So was that a really complicated process, getting that certification?
It is, and but what you do is you outsource it to specialized safety certification places. So there's all sorts of toy safety testing companies, and they go through the very many chemical and material property tests. But that said, so it's pretty straightforward. You find a reputable house, and they will certify your product, and you pay for it. So it's straightforward. The dolls are made from the SLS bog standard white nylon powder that you use in pretty much any of the big SLS machines. And so if anybody else wants to make an official toy, they can. But you would still have to go through the process, not for the materials, because the nylon passes without any problem, but for the shape. So like I said, if you printed a doll holding a dagger, it probably wouldn't pass.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, just having something like that tagged to, I mean, because 3D printing, it's just, a lot of people think if you're going to 3D print a toy, it's just something you downloaded off of Thingiverse, printed in your living room, and that's it. So getting anything certified with 3D printing is pretty impressive. So on that note, you have workshops. You've had a workshop set up at Selfridges this Christmas season. So are you expanding into more like retail workshop type stuff too?
So yes. So we're still in Selfridges. I mean, the thing that I should clarify is that the basic costs right now for the particularly the SLS printed product doesn't make sense for mass production, right? So it's expensive, in short, which is why Makies are not $20 each, and the materials, I don't know what the nylon is currently. I think it's something like $90 or 90 euros a kilo, which is really expensive, right? I mean, ABS comparatively is something like $5. So that's the main issue. And if the business model were just based around the margins on that physical product, it would be extremely hard to survive. But we designed it from the get-go that we would have a physical revenue stream from the physical products and a digital revenue stream from the games. So that's kind of how we can bridge the year gap, I guess, the couple of years that it's going to take for all of those materials, the material prices to come down and the machine prices to come down to the point where you can just mass produce using 3D printing. But you can't really do it right now. Not really, right? Because these...
Well, I mean, in comparison, I mean, how much is an American Girl doll? Because I know you can customize those.
So we have managed to hit that price. So a Makey is £69, which is $110, and American Girl is $110 plus tax. And I have been told that the average basket price for American Girl, this is anecdotal, so I don't know if it's true, but apparently the average basket, but once you've gone in and bought the doll and then all of the stuff that goes with it, you generally tend to spend $400.
Right.
Now, American Girl only exists in the States, right? I think they've literally just opened their first franchise in Canada. They don't exist in Europe. So again, we were like, well, we'll be like American Girl. And all the Europeans were like, what's that? And so the Americans, I think, are more primed to understand that there is a market for a $110 doll. They're like, oh yeah, that's like American Girl. So that works for us. So we can operate in that space basically, which is cool because they do sort of customization, but they do it the brute force way. So they have 40 different dolls that you can choose from. But if you have, brown eyes and brown curly hair or whatever, then you've kind of got 3. So that's how they do it. Whereas ours are literally, each one is technically unique.
Okay. So let's say I have chosen to customize a Makey doll over an American Girl doll for my niece's birthday. Because I want to do something maybe a little more Tank Girl inspired rather than American Girl doll. So I have designed the doll via the Makies website and have just hit the Make Real button.
Right.
So how does the Makey making process work?
So the mesh and the shape, the software behind that process on the site registers your Makey under your account. So it gives it a unique ID. And then the software converts the Makey to an STL file, effectively, and then packs it along with the other Makeys or the other objects that folks have ordered, and automatically sends that off to whichever third-party supplier we want to use for the printing. So we don't do the printing in-house at the moment because we're using SLS, and those machines start at 150 grand and up, and they're kind of big and messy, and so we currently at the size we are, again, we're sending those out. Then there's a bit of secret sauce in there that means that the pieces come back to us and we know which piece belongs to which customer. And then in the office, the doll is then assembled, and the hair, the eyes, and the clothes and the accessories that the person has chosen are then put onto the doll, and it goes into a tube and then is mailed out to them. So that whole process takes about 2 weeks.
And so, okay, and you're going to be introducing a new app later this month. And how is that going to change the gaming app? How is the gaming app going to change this whole experience?
So the game, you won't necessarily be able to see it immediately, because what happens with iOS games is you usually launch them quietly somewhere, just test with some live players, and then when it's all kind of the bugs are ironed out, then you launch live. So that's probably going to be, I don't know, say March. But what the game is it's a game about making. So Makies are called Makies not only because you make them yourself, but we're really trying to encourage people to make stuff for their Makies. And at the moment, you can print things like shoes or jewelry or accessories if you have a home printer, or on, maybe one that's school or something like that. And what the game does is it effectively, you have your character standing in a workshop, in a make space, and you grow plants and animals to produce basic materials. So you grow cotton and you grow flax, and you have a little rabbit and a sheep that you shear for things like wool. And then you take your basic materials and you put them through your machines, and in the workshop you'll have a textile machine, a little 3D printing machine, a little sewing machine. So you put your materials through that to create clothes or accessories or the sort of thing that dolls would wear. And it sort of levels you up through that making process. But over the months, as we do more and more releases, what will happen is that the cloth that you draw on, that you make and you draw on, will be printable into little cloth kits for your Makey. So you can have your Makey wearing an actual t-shirt that has a scribble on it that you've made yourself.
That's cool.
Yeah, and then all the little, shoes or whatever that you've customized, you'll be able to print on a MakerBot or a cube or whatever at home, or buy them straight from us if you don't have the machines. And on it goes. So generally our aim is that everything that you see in the game that's digital should be makeable real. And that also means that we're going to spread out into things like laser cutting and stuff like that, because we want to do things like furniture and stuff. So it won't just be 3D printed, but
very interesting.
All fall into the new manufacturing category type thing.
So, which percentage of the game would you say is gaming, and which percentage of the game would you say is kind of modeling or making?
Probably about 50-50 at the moment.
Okay.
It's hard to say because until we have the live players, we won't know how long they spend making. I think when it is live, they will spend a lot longer making than they spend leveling, like just kind of leveling up, because the leveling up bit is a kind of resource management thing. The creativity of making is going to be the draw. That's the really fun bit. That's the bit where you'll get like innate satisfaction and a sense of like, I made this, and you'll be able to show it off to people.
Totally. Is this specifically marketed to girls?
Sort of inevitably. Our target market is 8 to 12, and then playful adults. So certainly for the game, it's just going to kind of be 8 plus, 8 to 80, like any good iOS game. We don't want to discriminate, and we have girl Makies and boy Makies, and we have a fairly healthy male following, but inevitably, it's a doll, so inevitably it has skewed female. And I think girls... I think the boys like the fact that they can make a doll, right? I mean, male dolls are pretty much only in the category of warrior types now. Like, you can have a G.I. Joe. The British equivalent, Action Man, has been discontinued for ages. So, like, if you're a guy, if you're a boy and you want a doll, you basically only have the choice of things like Thor or, WWF or something like that. And that's
right.
Pretty straight-laced as well. I think a lot of parents are like, I don't want my boy playing with this stuff. This is violent, just violent. It's
totally.
Not creative, right? So
totally.
Yeah, so we're totally focusing on creative, but the word, you'll know that boy dolls are called action figures. We tried to get around this for a while by saying Makies were action dolls because they have knees and elbows. They can ride a motorbike, whether they're a male or a female. But at the end of the day, if you have the word doll in, there are a lot of parents who are like, oh, it's for girls only. So
that's a very fine marketing line. So you're definitely kind of in the Goldilocks realm, would you say? Kind of like girl engineers or just girls in general?
So I would say girls in general, because to be honest, well, our focus is making, right? So that's just gender neutral as far as I'm concerned. I just don't. It doesn't have to be as specific as engineering. The characters in the game, I'll bring this up because there's sort of 4 non-player characters that you deal with in the early parts of the game, and they represent kind of lots of facets of making. So, and secretly they're all named after scientists. So Ada's the girl in the workshop and she fixes the machines, and she's named after Ada Lovelace. And then Hopper, who's named after Grace Hopper, is the kind of fashionista, but she's into like textiles and stuff and will kind of be the person who represents things like sewing and, couture, and the kind of technical cutting stuff. And then there's Tesla, who's our boy character, and he's kind of more about CAD and interior design. And then there's Curie, who's our garden character, our botanist and chemist, and she's about materials and chemicals and stuff. So it's more broad than just engineering. Engineering is kind of included in it. But Goldie Blocks is brilliant, and we just need more of that. Like that whole, we definitely fit in the same category, in the same sector, right? So, and we need more people in that sector because there's just not enough.
Totally. So, I mean, and it's pretty much a new, arguably new sector of toys, is this whole making engineering toys. So what have you, what have been some of the more difficult challenges for you in keeping things afloat and getting the name out there and all that?
Oh yeah, all of it. I mean, we're a startup, right? So the biggest challenge in the early days was raising money. You have to go out and you have to do VC pitches and stuff, and you have to raise money, and that's not easy.
Did you
in itself
take the crowdfunding route, or?
No, we didn't. Like, we started in 2011, and Kickstarter was pretty much taking off at that point. But everything that was on Kickstarter back then was kind of stuff for like adults who have iPhones. It was all Pebble and things like that.
Totally.
And so we were like, this is sort of, we could go down that route. But the other thing about like crowdfunding is, what we're doing is a very long play, right? We turned up and we said we want to do virtual goods to physical goods, and we want to do games to toys, and we want to kind of get in there and slightly, do the opposite of the traditional toy industry. So not made in the Far East, not mass produced, made on demand, no waste, all those cool things that 3D printing means. But it wasn't going to be like, you have to sort of get there by showing it. And I was a little concerned that if we went onto Kickstarter, people would be like, what? Don't get it necessarily. And then you could fail to raise the money, at which point, and then it's really, really hard to go and raise anyway. I think if you went onto Kickstarter now, it would work. But yeah, it was more like, who's the audience at the end? Are the parents there? Are the kids there? And they just weren't at the time. So we went and raised traditional VC, and have been kind of building it piece by piece. And to go back to your question, the hard stuff, I mean, it is really hard to make a new physical product. It's hard to make a digital product. Somebody turned around to me yesterday and said 250 new apps a day on the App Store. I mean, you have to break through that.
Yeah.
Christian Segostrale, who's a very famous games maker, he did Playfish and stuff. He said, you need a minimum now of $1 million and kind of 12 people to make a basic, good, free-to-play Apple, iOS game.
Totally.
And then that does not include the marketing money. So yeah, it's hard. It's all hard. But I think we've managed to get a lot of organic kind of attention, not least because dolls and like people have just reacted really well to them. But like our challenge now is to reach a US audience, right? Because we've done really well in the UK and people know about us in Europe, but I think for the most part, folks in the US won't have heard of us yet.
So early stages, funding, growth were all, challenges. And so alternatively, what have been some of the more pleasant surprises along the way? The
pleasant stuff, I mean, it has been brilliant. So what is an absolute delight is when you meet a kid, you know, a 10-year-old, and she turns up, or in some cases he, and they're like, this is what I've done with my Makey, look what I made. And that feeling is just like, oh, that's just so awesome. You've made all of this stuff, and you can see the pride on their face, and it's just brilliant, right? That's a joy every single time. We had a couple of, and we get like little letters from like, the little girl sent us a letter from Pakistan going, I want a Pakistani flag for my Makey and stuff. And we were like, okay, 3D printer. So there's like really fun little stories. And the Makeys really are going all over the place. You know, they've gone as far as things like Singapore and plenty to the US comparatively. Most of our sales are in the UK, but to the US and some in South America even. So that's great. The other thing that happened is we slightly randomly got asked to show Makeys to Prince Harry and David Cameron, and so we ended up making Makeys for Prince Harry and David Cameron, which kind of sparked off a bunch of requests. And so we've made Makeys now for like Jessie J, the pop star, and stuff like that. And the reaction to that has been hilarious. Prince Harry and David Cameron holding dolls just makes us laugh every day. It's great. So yeah, it's all been kind of word of mouth to date, right? I mean, we haven't spent the marketing money because we haven't really got any. So the fact that people are noticing and doing cool things and then taking funny pictures is great.
Totally. So the US is definitely in your scope is kind of like the next big market.
Yeah, totally. If we'd had the same sort of organic attention that we had in the UK, if we were based in the US from day one, our market, our sales would be 10x what they are now, just because of the size of your amazing country. We're recording this. I'm in Las Vegas at the moment, and there's just a lot more Americans. And plus, going back to that price point, there's a lot more acceptance, I think, for the price point. So
totally.
Our focus is to get over here and to get noticed in amongst the noise. But the maker scene in the States as well is huge, right? I mean, you guys started it. So the size of maker fairs and stuff like that, I think, again, there's this kind of willingness there, whereas still Europe is always a little bit behind.
There's been a huge upswing, though, with the maker crowd in the UK, so it will be exciting to see what happens in the next few years over there.
Oh, totally. I mean, the change is rapid, and like so much has happened in the past 2 years. So like I say, we're only a tiny bit behind but generally the US leads the way, just the sheer size. So I went to Newcastle, our national maker fair, and I think there were 4,000 people last year. It'll probably be like double that this year, but like the one on the West Coast alone is 110,000 people.
Right.
So it's just a scale difference, right?
Totally.
Our island is pretty tiny.
It's interesting too, if you go to the Bay Area Maker Faire, then the New York City Maker Faire, it's just seeing the different kinds of makers that there are. Like the West Coast seems to have more of like a Burning Man type crowd, and then the East Coast is kind of a more science oriented crowd, at least from what I gathered.
That's really interesting. I've only been to the West Coast one. I'd really like to get to the New York one, because that's, but that kind of makes sense. Yeah, like half of the West Coast one is Burning Man art and stuff like that.
So, okay, now that you have your framework in place, I mean, you're coming out with the iPad game, which is going to do amazing, I know. But in terms of the actual on-demand manufacturing for physical toys, now that you have the framework in place, are there any other plans on the horizon for exploring other toy markets by any chance?
Yeah, totally. I mean, dolls made sense for us because dolls is the biggest single category of toys. Construction is the second biggest. And avatars, who doesn't love an avatar, right? So It made total sense to start with dolls. But the software is shape agnostic. So it doesn't, a doll is, I've said this a lot, a doll is a dinosaur, is a car, is a whatever. We, like I said, we've learned a lot. So obviously volume-based printing, our second product, whatever it is going to be smaller. And so it will be cheaper. And so there'll be some basic stuff like that. At the moment, we're playing around with little pocket-sized characters. So, that could be a kind of pocket doll, or it could be like a Warhammer figure, or it could be both. Like, what happens when you combine those? That's awesome. Dolls with hammers. But yeah, so we're mucking around with that. We just made the choice to focus on Makies a bit more this year. Well, not a bit more, kind of more singly this year, just because one of the great challenges is like there is so much that you can do, is to not kind of rush around going, we could do this, we could do that, and to actually just focus and get your basic product down, which we have done. Like, Makies are good now. They're at a good price and they're a good shape and they've got a growing fan base. So we can roll that now and start to think about what the second product would look like.
Totally.
But yeah, whatever it is, smaller and cheaper.
What about just scaling down every file that you already have? Just scaling it down to pocket size?
Interestingly, with human shapes or character shapes, that doesn't really work. Like, when you scale down, you have to redesign the whole thing anyway. Certainly things like wigs, like that basic thing, that doesn't scale down. But the character shape, this is what chibi, if little Japanese characters, like you'll see tall dolls, but then when you get down to kind of 2 inches high, they're called chibi, and they've got big heads and then big feet and huge eyes and these sort of tiny little bodies, and the whole kind of what's the word I'm looking for? Sorry, I'm jet lagged. The whole like relativity bit, the relationship, that the size and shape of the character changes completely. So sadly, it's not a case of just going, 20% done.
Totally.
That would work with a car. Like, a car doesn't mind just being scaled down.
Right.
So, but characters is weird, unless you're going for like tiny little military figures. But we're not.
Yeah, that's understandable. So.
Yeah.
Okay, last question for you, Alice. What will we be 3D printing in 10 years?
Oh God, yeah. I you asked me earlier. You said, like I had a belief in it. So I started on the web in '95. Came out of college. What the hell am I going to do? Oh my God, that looks amazing. Taught myself HTML, and when I first saw the internet, I was like, this changes everything. This is huge, and I pretty much feel the same way about 3D printing. Not just 3D printing, I mean laser cutters as well and that kind of stuff. All this new manufacturing, basically, where suddenly the everything, it changes everything because we can afford it, it's local, anyone can have a go, right? That's like the internet. It was like, you don't have to ask permission, you can just get on there and teach yourself stuff. And things are the same sort of deal, Moore's law plus time, etc. So machines are getting cheaper, materials are getting cheaper. When patents expire and people dive in and sort of proliferate, like the number of extrusion machines on the market now is extraordinary. That's just an explosion. And that's not going to stop. So in 10 years' time, like, it's the equivalent now, like in 95, there were a whole bunch of people kind of going, like, email, that looks complicated. 10 years later, look at that. So it's the same, right? At the moment we're just kind of moving into one button machines or two materials, right? In 10 years, it'll be multi-material and, it'll be hooked up to your phone and it'll be 100 quid and whatever. So I can't wait for that. I mean, that whole journey is just going to be awesome, and it's going to be like the same journey as we've seen with web-based stuff. So
Totally. Well, Alice, thank you so much for joining us on the show today. I know your iPad app is going to be awesome. So we can expect it in March, you said?
Yeah, pretty much. And in the meanwhile, Makey.me, the site is where it's all happening anyway. So throughout that whole process, you can make Makies as people are right now just on the site. So, yeah.
Okay, well, I'll be sure to put a link to that underneath this show for those listening in. So thanks again so much for joining us today, and
you're so welcome.
Best of wishes with the Makies.
Thank you very much.
This show is brought to you by CAD Junkie. Step up your 3D content creation game with hundreds of video tutorials ranging from footwear design to 3D printing. Get a free membership now over at cadjunkie.com. Thanks for listening in today, and if you'd like to find out more on Alice and Makies, be sure to check them out at Makey.me, and keep an eye out for the iOS app available this spring. On our next episode, we'll be coming to you from the Ford Motor Company Design Studio in Detroit, where we'll take a sneak peek at what the company is up to going into the future of car design. I'm your host, Simon Martin. Stay tuned and check in with us next time on Maker Galaxy.
A production of EBD Media.